Hello and welcome to Bulk Mailer Professional and Business. It makes sense to upgrade. This is a Satori software webinar, one of the Getting the Most Out of Bulk Mailer webinar series. It's a new series that we're doing. I'm going to go through and talk to you a little bit about bulk mailer and some things you might not know about it. Before we get started, let's cover just a couple of very quick housekeeping items. Number one, if you participate in social media, and who doesn't these days? I know Kim and Bob are very active. They are tweeting to each other even as I'm talking right now. You can connect with Satori Software via Twitter, on LinkedIn, and on Facebook. You're laughing at me, Bob? Various tags and handles you need to connect with us are at the end of this presentation. Next, this webinar is being recorded, so if you need to drop off or you'd like to present it to someone else or say, hey, I heard that Kim say this thing, it's going to be recorded and it will be available on the satorisoftware.com website. Next, and I think this is probably the most important point I will make during this entire webinar, on the right-hand side of your screen is a question box. Please use that. Feel free. Pepper myself, although I don't know if I can help, but Kim and Bob are going to be prepared to answer questions. And at the end of this, we will have a question and answer period. I'll be collating those questions and passing them along to both Kim and Bob. So please use that question box. Stump Kim and Bob is the name of the game for today. Finally, this webinar is scheduled to last about 60 minutes. Judging by the huge volume of energy drinks that both Kim and Bob have had, they might actually speed through this. However, if we get a lot of good questions, we're going to go ahead and push it right up to the 60 minutes. In the event that we do get a lot of questions and it starts to spill over, please, and you have to disconnect. Like I said, it's going to be recorded, but please feel free to stick with us if you can. As I mentioned, the webinar will be recorded and will be posted up on satorisoftware.com. Now, who's going to be presenting today? First off, we've got Bob Shimmick, who is the Senior Director of Postal Affairs for Satori Software. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you.
Where are you, Bob? No,
Am I here?
Let's try that. Let's try
All
that
right,
microphone.
yeah, that's better.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks.
Bob also does a regular weekly program for Satori Software called Postal Affairs with Bob Shimmick, where he talks about everything that you need to know going into the mailing week. So if you are interested in the current news in mailing, there's really only one place you can go get it. And of course, you listen to Bob's soothing voice at the same time, posted on the satorisoftware.com blog every Monday morning. And of course, Kim Mock, Senior Product Manager for Satori Software and Product Owner for Bulk Mailer.
Good morning.
Good morning. How's that energy drink treating you?
Oh, I'm starting to feel it.
You are seriously caffeinated. I can tell just by looking at you. And of course, I'm Rob Perrin. I'm the Director of Multimedia Marketing for Satori Software, and I will be your host today. So Kim, you've got a lot of stuff you're going to talk about, so let's go ahead and get started.
All right. So today, rather than have a kind of boring agenda slide, I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about Bulk Mailer Professional and Bulk Mailer Business and what really the differences are, who would select Business over Pro, when would be a good time for you to make that decision, and how you would make that transition happen. So we've got a lot of different questions, and hopefully by the end of today's webinar, you'll have a lot of information to be able to make that decision and be able to make your next steps if that applies to you. So let's take a look at kind of some generic why questions. And we're going to kind of dive into these a little bit more as we go throughout the entire webinar here. But one of the big reasons that we have customers look at Bulk Mailer Business, if they're a current Bulk Mailer Professional customer, is they have some issues with database limitations. So if things like processing speed or the size of your list or the number of records that you're processing is something that's being a limitation on the efficiency of your company, then Bulk Mailer Business can be a really interesting tool. And I've got some good stats at the end here that we can go through that'll really help kind of define what those limitations are today in Bulk Mailer Pro and how that's totally surpassed.
And it can actually be a combination of both of those, can't it? It can be that your business is growing, which is, of course, something we wish for all of our customers, and your files are getting larger, you're processing more and more, and of course, as you get busier, now you have less time to wait, and so it's sort of a double whammy. Things take a while, and so there's an advantage in both directions with that.
Yeah, and especially with the speed side of things, it's kind of interesting because I have yet to meet a mailer who doesn't have the 1 day turnaround problem.
Sure.
You get a job that's dropped on your desk right after lunch, and you're expected to put it out that day. And sometimes that can be a limitation based on the size of that mailing. Sometimes you're not able to do that inside of Pro without having those little anxiety moments.
Because customers walk in all the time and say, here's a job, take as long as you want with it.
I think that's pretty rare in the space today. So we're in that instant gratification society. And so being able to turn those jobs around very quickly is very, very important. So database limitations is something that that might be a problem for you, and that would be a good reason to look at bulk mailer business. Another one is how many people are involved in the creation of your mailings. So how many people do you have running address correction, running pre-sort, actually designing and printing the actual mail piece itself, and how do they interact across your process? So is this something where you have one person who does one job and another person who does another job, and that's all you have? Or do you have multiple people who need to share information and do so in a really streamlined way? Then there are some really interesting tools with bulk mailer business that can help with that. And then the other thing that you'd want to look at is how many clients are you actually mailing for. So if you're an in-house mailer, you're mailing for yourself, you're using your own permit, and so it's pretty straightforward. You have your mailer ID, you have your customer registration ID, and it's all set up and everything's good to go. But if you have multiple clients, being able to manage all those permits, manage all their mailer IDs and their sequence numbers, it gets pretty complex pretty fast. And so we have some tools inside of bulk mailer business that can really help to organize your processes in that way.
And this will become more and more important as everyone in the industry continues to move forward with full service, e-induction, seamless, being able to really identify all your different owners as we get to invoicing down the road, or postage assessments. It's not invoicing, but as we get to postage assessments, being able to control which permits are being used. There's a lot of additional flexibility or that's going to be needed moving forward.
Exactly. So let's dive into this a little bit further. So let's look at the people who would want to start looking at a change. The first, obviously, is mail service providers. So if you're doing mailings for other companies, being able to manage your clients' information, being able to turn around those jobs at the drop of a hat is a really crucial way to do your business. You want to be as efficient as possible, to be able to take on as much bandwidth as you can, because time is money, right? You want to be able to turn those jobs around and get on to the next one, so you're not paying your employees overtime, and that everybody gets to go home and have dinner with their family. So mail service providers are definitely a key user of bulk mailer business. Another one is for anyone who's using a rather large list. And for the definition of bulk mailer, large is really only 100,000 records. So it's pretty easy to regularly have a job that's 100,000 records or more. And so anytime you're using bulk mailer professional, you have the limitations of the database backend. And so being able to have a different database backend, it gives you more opportunity to process those jobs in a quicker fashion, in a more efficient way as well.
Now, to be clear, 100,000, that's actually a lot of mail.
It is a lot of mail for a single job, but these days you've got a lot of we've got a lot of mail service providers who are starting to take on more national jobs. And so even though you may not be the quickie print in the corner office, even those smaller locations are starting to take on those bigger jobs that are going to impact more people.
And I do want to mention something. There's a risk here that it sounds like we're upselling business. And I want to be clear that if somebody calls in and they lay out the criteria, here's the sort of mailings we do, et cetera, we want to make sure customers are matched with the correct product.
Exactly.
So as a result, we're happy to say, no, it sounds like a Pro is a perfect match for you. I would stick with that. So I just want to be clear from the beginning that that's not the way we've operated it here at Satori. We've talked about this on a number of different webinars, but if you call, you're not going to get automatically told that business is an upgrade for you that you need.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, if you're you're a periodical mailer. You're a weekly magazine or a weekly newsletter that you're sending out, and you have an established list that's maybe 50,000 records or less.
Mm-hmm.
Then Bulk Mailer Professional is probably not a great fit for you. You only have your permit and maybe a couple spare permits, but really you're not managing those larger lists, the greater span of things, and you've got a schedule, right? You're regularly processing things every week, so things are very predictable. Bulk mailer business is a little bit better for those people who don't have that predictable schedule and who get that mailing dropped off at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and have to turn it around by the end of the day.
And we're confident enough in the product line here that there's a product for everybody. And so as a result, we don't need to upsell you into something you don't need. So just wanted to throw that out there because, it starts to sound like we're headed that direction, and we're not. If you call and you say, I'm a small mailer and here's what I've got, we're going to say, hey, Pro's a good match. Stick with it.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, so again, that speed of processing, making sure that everything's running. If you do have those kind of emergency jobs, then that's going to be a good fit for you.
And you have some great numbers. There's a chart later on. I
yeah.
peeked ahead in your presentation, and I'm really amazed at the difference in performance. If minutes or hours make a difference in your business, then business might make sense.
Yep, exactly. Yep. And then of course, if you have multiple people who are involved in the creation of the mailing. So obviously if you've got a front desk person and things like that aren't really going to be touching the mailing software, we wouldn't count those as a user. Mm-hmm. This would be things like people who are importing lists, actually processing the lists through address correction, sorting, submitting their eDoc, and actually printing as well. If you have multiple people involved in that process, then Bulk Mailer is going to be a good fit for you.
And as the complexity of mailings continues to increase, having more than one person that understands the software, understands what needs to be done, just so you have that internal backup, because you always know there's going to be situations where someone's out of the office and it can't stop you from continuing to run your business. So more and more often there are multiple user scenarios where people just need that for backup.
And even if you've got the concept of different roles, you've got people who run different parts of the software at different times, that overlap is a handy thing to have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So let's talk a little bit about, we've kind of hinted at this whole idea of the database limitations and things like that. So let's talk a little bit about the main difference between Bulk Mailer Business and Bulk Mailer Professional is really the database that's on the back end. So Bulk Mailer Professional is built on the Microsoft Jet database, which is also what Microsoft Access is built on as well. And so it's a very strong database system, but it's not as scalable as SQL Server is. So what we've done with Bulk Mailer Business is we built it on the platform of Microsoft SQL Server, which is actually the kind of the premier database backend for any mailing product that's installed in the market today. And so SQL Server is really a very powerful technology that allows our customers to have more flexibility. So one of the main limitations of the Jet database is the size limitation. So the actual file size for what you can import and what you can process is 2 gigabytes. And the same is true for some other database systems that are out there, like the DBF. So anything that's in FoxPro would have that 2 gig size limitation. Now, another thing that SQL Server allows us to do is it actually allows for larger text fields. So, obviously for an address line, you're probably going to need maybe 100 characters. Not so bad. And that's totally manageable within the Access database. With SQL Server, you actually have not even just a limitation of 255 characters, but you can go into thousands of characters per text field.
Why would you want to do that?
And, really, we don't have a ton of people who run into this, but sometimes we'll have people have, as part of their input file, they'll have entire paragraphs that are part of their kind of the extra data payload that goes along with the list, right? And so it might be their confirmation letter, and it might be the actual text that's associated with that. And maybe there's some variable print that's associated with that as well. And all of that information can actually be managed inside of SQL Server because it doesn't have that 255 character limit. So a lot of customers who are using Bulk Mailer Professional would actually take and just not import those fields, and then they would have to match them back up at the end. And so with bulk mailer business, you just import it, and then you do what you need to do at the outside. You can print it or you can export it back out, and then you don't have to do that merge at the end.
And one of the things that we're seeing with the Postal Service, especially with the incentives that are going on this year, is they're really starting to focus on personalization and really doing customized messaging and marketing to individuals based on what you already know about them. And there's so much data out there about all your customers' interests that the better you know the customer and you can tailor the message specifically to them, the better it's going to be. And this is where bulk mailer business gives you that flexibility to really enhance and increase the amount of personalization that you're putting into your mailings.
Well, 10 years ago, you would never have a mailing address file that had, say, an email address or a URL or anything else like that appended onto it. And nowadays you might. So who knows what kind of data you want to attach in there, a customer file or something else.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and so with the SQL Server backend, it gives a lot of flexibility for both the size of your mailing in general, not just the mailing list, but also the individual fields inside of there. And the other thing that SQL Server gives you is a really convenient way to back up, and we've actually simplified it even more than Microsoft has. So there are some backup utilities that are available inside of SQL Server, but we've actually narrowed that down to just a simple click. We have a backup and restore tool that will back up everything to do not just with your mailings, but also all the templates and everything else that you use. So for example, if you have a number of templates that you use for sorting and grouping your records, importing, printing, all of that information is actually stored inside of the SQL Server database. And what you can do is you can back up all that information at whatever frequency works for you. And that gives you a lot more of confidence that you're going to be able to keep your business running. So if that one machine with the server goes down, you can restore it to another machine very quickly and get back up on and running very quickly. So let's talk a little bit more about the database fields. In addition to that field size that we have, so it can be over 2,000 characters. I haven't really seen anything more than 2,000 characters, although I would challenge anyone to do that. But I actually saw someone actually have a user field that was the entire text of the cover letter that they were sending out, all in one field.
It was the best of times. It was the worst of times.
It was rather lengthy for sure. So obviously we're not going to initially create the database to have a 2,000 record size for each of your text fields. We started a very manageable size for each of the user fields. It's about 100 characters. And but what'll happen is actually Bulk Mailer will expand that field based on the data that you input. So whether it's through the import wizard or if it's through editing through the views, we'll actually expand those fields to encompass all the data that you have. So you don't have to do that database management where you're going in and changing, okay, user field 3 was 100 characters, now I need 150 or what have you.
Now, Pro will do that up to the 255 limit,
Exactly.
But what you're saying here is that business will then blow right through 255 and head northward of that.
Yep, and it'll do it all behind the scenes, so you don't have to manage that at all.
So if I cut and paste a Tolstoy novel into there, we're good.
Yeah, you should be good to go.
Yep.
It might be a little difficult to print. You might have a couple reams of paper to go there,
Well,
but
paper's cheap.
yeah, not these days, but it's very capable from a database level. Another thing that Bulk Mailer Business does is it allows you a little bit more flexibility with what extra data and how many fields of extra data you can import. So where Bulk Mailer Professional has 15 user text fields that are installed by default with each of the files, with Bulk Mailer Business, we actually start out with 30 user text fields, but you can add as many additional fields as you want. And again, you're not limited to that 2 gigabyte database size. So you can keep adding those user text fields, and you can rename them so that you remember, okay, this is the account number, this is their car color, or what have you.
Car color?
Sometimes you want to market to the people who have a blue Mercedes, right? And so that customization is really, really hot in the mailing market right now. That's everything that we heard at NPF this year was
knowing as much as you can about the customer so you can really tailor the message to them.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. So if you know you have a blue Mercedes, then you can print a picture of their blue Mercedes on their mail piece, and they say, "Hey, that's my car." And there's that emotional tie-in to that mail piece, and it makes it so much more powerful.
Cool.
Yeah. So we have an unlimited number of user fields. Obviously, unlimited should probably be in quotes. It's based on the size of the database. So once you start getting into the thousands of user fields, you're going to be expanding to the limitations of SQL Server, which is about 4 gigabytes. So you're going to be, and then of course it also depends on the number of records. So it's but it will expand. You have your 30 user text fields, and then as many as you want of those. And we also have user fields for numbers and dates and phone numbers as well. So there's a lot of flexibility there as to what you can import, what data you can pass through bulk mailer and get into your print system or export for another system as well. So just to add those additional fields, you would just click on that new, and you can just keep clicking as long as you can. I've gone up to 150 before my fingers got a little tired. So, but there's a lot of user fields that you can add there. So we've talked a lot about kind of the database structure. Let's talk about this a little bit more from a personal context. So one of the things that's really powerful about bulk mailer business is the ability of interaction.
Is that picture in the lower right corner, is that you, Kim?
It looks a little bit like...
It looks like you.
Her hair's not quite curly enough, but...
Huh.
but yeah, it's really interesting because we do have a lot of customers, especially in the mail service provider space, who have multiple people involved in the creation of a mailing.
Sure.
Whether that's a customer service rep who has got the list from the customer and they want to get it ready for the actual database people to start looking at, or you have the people who are managing the database. They're going through and making sure that the fields are lined up and that everything's set up properly there. They're doing the dedupe. They're making sure that everything's aligned. You've got the people who are just doing the address correction, move, sorting, and then you've got the people who are taking that information and printing it and maybe importing it into a variable data program or something along those lines. But you have a lot of people who are involved in that whole process who are really specialized, but a lot of times you want to have some redundancy there. You want to make sure you have multiple people trained on all these different areas, and you want to be able to have access to the lists and templates that are available. So if Jill started a job on Tuesday and then on Wednesday she calls in sick, someone else can log in and you can pick up with the list that she created and then also the templates that she had. So bulk mailer business with the SQL backend all runs on a single database. And you can actually purchase multiple user accounts that would allow multiple people to access that database all at the same time. So with that, it's not just the address list, it's also the templates themselves. So that we're talking about the pre-sort settings or the import settings or the print settings that are all available in that template can be shared across all the users in your network. So that's a really powerful thing there, and it's really interesting to be able to set up a template on one machine and instantly it's visible on another machine. And so it's a really easy way for you to kind of coordinate within your company.
So I could have multiple people managing my mailings then, and we could do the old secretarial pool model where a job comes in and the next available person, doesn't matter who, can grab the templates appropriate and the lists appropriate to use that.
Exactly. So you can have multiple people, each with their own instance of bulk mailer, and they'll be able to run their own job. And so you could have 4 people running all different jobs and really maximizing the time that you have available to run those jobs.
I'm done with my job. I'll take the next one, whatever it is. And
Yep.
the information that I need is all centrally available.
Yeah, and even within each of those individual users, you can actually have a single user on a single machine opening up multiple instances of bulk mailer. And so they can actually be running multiple jobs on a single machine, really maximizing the time. So especially if you've got a larger job, it's going to take a little while for, say, address correction to run. You can open up another instance of bulk mailer, start processing that next job, setting up the templates for that next job as well.
Now, that's a cool point. That's on business only, right?
That is business only. Yep.
So that right there is actually kind of useful.
So
Yep.
one of the other scenarios to keep in mind as we move forward too is, the postal scorecard is becoming more and more important to monitor quality and potentially avoid assessments down the
That
road.
they're threatening to charge people for
Right.
it. Yes.
So not only do you have to worry about managing day-to-day, running the jobs, getting the mail out the door, all those day-to-day activities, but you're also going to need people in the role of monitoring the scorecard. And yes, it's looking at Postal Service data, but you're going to have to, when there's errors being reported, you're going to want to go back and match that up to the data that you have about that same job and compare and make sure that it's really correct. And so, there could be multiple people here that are also needing to get in there and look at past jobs and figure out what's going on.
If you've only got one seat available, the machine's locked up, then you would be taking time away from your time that you could do mailings then, because somebody's got to go in and do auditing, but the machine's locked up doing mailings. Here you've got another seat that could open that up, be doing auditing. Correct. While someone else is doing mailing.
Mm-hmm.
Correct.
Oh, you're right. That is going to be really important when they start charging on these assessments.
Yeah. Yeah. And another thing that, in addition to the templates and the jobs, is this actually gives the opportunity for a single place to assign your sequence numbers. So for those of you who are on full service, you know all about sequence numbers and how difficult they are to manage, especially if you only have a certain number of mailer IDs. And so having a centralized location where all of those sequence numbers are assigned for each of your mailer IDs, Bulk Mailer Business will keep track of all of the mailer IDs across all of your systems. Everybody who's using that single business database will be able to keep track of those and make sure that those sequence numbers are unique.
So you're saying across instances here. So if
Yes.
you and I are doing mailings off Bulk Mailer at the same time, we're each going to get our IDs and it's going to keep track of them.
Yeah. And you don't have to worry about, okay, well, Susan used the numbers 1 through 50,000 for hers, so I have to make sure that I start with the next number, and you don't have those collisions there.
And that's one of the big points that I've seen at customer visits. You go there, and folks are tracking this as a nightmare for people, and this makes it easy.
Lots of Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah, lots of Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah.
There was one company that was tracking them in Notepad, and everybody had to check in on the Notepad to make sure that there was they weren't duplicating them.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
this is a lot easier.
Yeah. You just click a button and it just does it for you.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's really great. So let's talk a little bit more about users. So like in that previous screen, we saw the 4 different people who are all accessing the database at the same time. You will want to have a user for each instance of Bulk Mailer on a different machine. So if you only have one person who's going to be doing those jobs, then you would only need one user. But there is an add-on so that you can purchase for the number of users that you want to have accessing the database at the same time. And usually we sell those in about a 5-user pack, so you have plenty to work with. And so you can actually set up each of these users with different roles. So you have a person who would be an administrator who would be able to do all of the things inside of Bulk Mailer and manage the users. You've got people who might just be importing a list and maybe running address correction. You have people who might just be printing. You might have someone who's specifically just dealing with electronic documentation. So someone who really, all they're going to do is they're going to open up a job and they're going to submit the eDoc to the post office. So you can assign them that role and then they would be able to just do that stuff within Bulk Mailer. And again, each of these would all be accessing the same database with the same mailings and the same templates.
Bob, we're headed that way with mailing in general, this sort of specialization. As you were talking about, the roles have split. The days of having one person who did all your mailing for you, that's a hard thing to accomplish now.
Right. With mailings getting much more complex, you're absolutely right. Yeah. It's a divide and conquer approach that often needs to be done.
Used to be fire and forget with mail, and then it was, well, now you're going to submit everything to the USPS, and now there's a return from that audits your performance and talks about how successful your mailing was, and somebody's got to put that information back in and correct your information. So it's much more complicated.
It is, yes.
So let's talk a little bit more about that whole organizing concept here. So like I said, everybody who's logged into the same bulk mailer business database is going to be able to see all the mailings and all the templates. So here I have a screen that I have for kind of my jobs that I process, and so here what we have is we have a couple different features. One is you have the quick ability to package up a mailing. This is if you really do need to email it. So generally when you're using bulk mailer business, everybody's using the same database, so you don't have to email it to your coworker. But say for example, if you have a technical question and you need to email our support, we have a way to package that up so that you can send it over. Another feature that we have here is the option to archive a mailing. And for those of you who've been using bulk mailer for a while, you kind of get used to the rows and rows and rows of mailings on that home screen. And so the archive mailing is a way for you to kind of hide that mailing from view. It's still there, it's in the background, but it's not cluttering up your home screen. And another way to kind of organize your work is using those folders. And those folders are actually going to be used throughout your entire company. So one of the interesting ways that you can use folders in the context of bulk mailer business is you can actually use it as a job assignment tool. So you could create folders for each of your employees, or you could have them for each of your processes. And so say, for example, you get a new job in from a customer. The customer service rep can import that list and then drop it into the ready for address correction folder. And then whoever's in charge of address correction, they just live in that folder. They watch, and as soon as a job is dropped inside that folder, they can pick it up, process it, and then drop it into the next folder.
So you're streamlining process for free.
Yeah, and it's really cool because it just happens automatically. So you could just be watching that folder, you could have nothing in that screen, and as soon as that person has dropped it in, you see it on your dashboard, you're able to pick it up, do what you need to do, and then drop it into the next folder for the next person. So here's another way that you can kind of get some interesting data out of bulk mailer business. So one of the kind of unseen tools inside of bulk mailer that's also available in bulk mailer professional is the idea of searching. So especially for those of you who have a lot of stuff going on in your home screen, or if you have a lot of mailings that are organized in your folders, sometimes finding the mailing that you want to talk about can be a little bit tricky. So if you click on the actions button on the left hand side, there's an option there called search, and you can search using any term, because it could be the name of the mailing, anything in the description, which folder it's in, any of that information. In bulk mailer business, you can also search for the client. So when you create a mailing, you're going to assign the client to that mailing. And then what you can do inside of the search is you can search for the name of that client, and then all the jobs that are associated with that client will appear. And you'll also notice that in this screen here, I have the sort postage listed. And so what you can do is if you have a customer who says, how much did I spend in postage last year? You can bring up the search screen, search for that client, and then automatically you can see the sort postage, you can add it up, and then send it out to your customer. So it's kind of a neat little trick there. Again, the search functionality is available in professional as well. It's just not going to be associated with the client. So let's talk a little bit more about clients. Clients in the mail service provider world can be a little tricky to organize. We'll just put it that way. We've got
master of understatement.
we've got permits, we've got mids, we've got crids, we've got sequence numbers, we've got how do we manage all of this. And so with bulk mailer business, there's a really easy way for you to manage your clients, and it's in the manage clients section. Imagine that. So
it's almost like they planned it that way.
We try to be as simple as possible when it comes to naming things, and usually that tends to be the best way to do it. So there's this whole area where you can go in and you can define each of your clients, and this is going to be all the information about that client that is just to do with that client. So this is going to be their permit information, their mailer IDs and crids, to make sure that everything's going to line up for their full service, right? So here we can go in, we can define our client information. You'll see there at the bottom there, it says the customer registration ID, that's their CRID. You'll fill in all that information, and we'll be able to save that going forward. Another thing that you'll notice on this screen that we're going to talk about in pretty good depth next week is going to be that little easy track section there. And so plug for next week. Come back and you can learn a lot about tracking. But one of the really cool features with Bulk Mailer Business and Easy Track is the ability to give your customers a login to see their mailings. And so for Bulk Mailer Business, when you assign a job to a client, you can actually give them their own user ID and password. They can log in and they would only see their mailings and none of your other customers' mailings. And it gives them the peace of mind that they know where their mail is and when it's going to be delivered.
And as you mentioned, we're going to go into that more depth next week. This webinar and that webinar are part of our ongoing series, Getting the Most Out of Bulk Mailer. Bob, tracking a big deal for USPS these days, right?
Very much so, yes.
That's huge.
They're making some very significant investments in a brand new platform around providing all that tracking data, which they refer to as informed visibility.
And there's a lot of data there, too. I was up in our tech department just a couple of days ago watching a mail piece move through the system. It's fun. You can see the scans and see how things actually happen. So anyway, more on that next week. And you can sign up on our website, same place you signed up for this one.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so once you have your client that's set up here, this is where you would be able to see their user ID and password. So if they have an issue, you can actually log in as them and make sure that everything's okay.
And one thing to note here too is if we look at across a national average working with the Postal Service, there are several different components to complying with full service. One is identifying mail owners, and that is done through mailer IDs and through CRIDs. And that is one area and one aspect of full service where when the Postal Service looks at the industry as a whole, they're exceeding the threshold that has been established for that. And so there's still some more work that needs to be done in that area. And for anyone out there that is doing anything with working with nonprofits, even if a nonprofit is mailing 10 pieces, you're required to identify them in the electronic documentation. And so Bulk Mailer Business can have that repository there for you. So when you're dealing with potentially hundreds of different clients, it can greatly simplify that process.
More streamlining.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, so once you've set up kind of the generic company information, you'll go in and set up their permit information as well. And this is where, if they are a nonprofit, you would assign their nonprofit number. It's actually it kind of streamlines that permit creation as well. So it's going to grab all the information from the previous screen to help you create that permit. And then another thing that's really cool is the management of the mailer IDs. So for those of you who've been working with Intelligent Mail for a while, you know that you've got your 9-digit mailer IDs, you've got your 6-digit mailer IDs. If you don't have a 6-digit mailer ID, then you're kind of limited in the number of sequence numbers that you can use within that 45-day period. So several people who have a 9-digit mailer ID have multiple mailer IDs because they want to be able to manage each of those and be able to keep those sequence numbers unique for a longer length of time. So with Bulk Mailer Business, one of the things that's really cool is you can actually create multiple mailer IDs per client and multiple mailer IDs for yourself as the mail preparer as well. So for that, what'll happen is once you've assigned all of these new mailer IDs here, we'll actually roll through all of them and use up all the sequence numbers for the first mailer ID and then go to the second one before going back to the first. Or if you have multiple, we'll go through all the sequence numbers for each of the mailer IDs before going back to the first one. So it'll automatically keep track of those sequence numbers across all your mailer IDs, making sure that your sequence numbers are unique for as long as possible. So not just that 45-day period, but as long as your sequence numbers will allow you to. And it'll rotate through just automatically. You don't even have to think about it.
There's a lot of growth potential in business.
Yeah. And so if you have, if you start out with 2 mailer IDs and you need to add one later, you can just add it and it'll just start using that new one. Yeah. So we talked a little bit about being able to set up the mailer IDs for yourself as well. There is a company information screen here that's going to be for you as the mail service provider, if you are a mail service provider, to be able to fill in your information, your customer registration ID, of course. And then if you have multiple mailer IDs, you can assign those here as well. And again, we'll rotate through all of them and make sure that all of your sequence numbers are unique across all your mailings, across all your users, and rotate through them all automatically.
Imagine doing that with Notepad.
It would get a little interesting. And on a Monday morning, I don't think I would have enough energy for that, enough coffee in the day. So this can be a really easy tool for you to kind of set it and forget it. Here are my mailer IDs, just use them, and then Bulk Mailer keeps track of the rest.
I thought it was just me that got a headache from mids and crids, and then I was on a site visit talking to a customer, and apparently you just never get used to it.
Yeah, it's like eating your broccoli. You just have to do it, right? So here we go. And once you've got all your mailer IDs and everything set up for all of your clients, when you actually go in to create a mailing, you'll actually have a screen inside the new mailing wizard that will allow you to assign the client for that mailing. So for this mailing, I've selected that my customer is going to be Pete's Pizzeria, and that's who I'm going to be doing this mailing for. And now when I go throughout the rest of the program, everything that I select, all the options that are available are only going to be applicable to this client. So before, when you were in the mail sort wizard and you were going through and selecting a permit, you would see every single permit for every single client that you have in your entire company, and probably some ones that are old that you don't even deal with those clients anymore. And so with Bulk Mailer Business, you have the opportunity to just narrow it down to the permits that apply to that client and that client only. And of course, you can change the client here. So if you accidentally assign the wrong one on the first page, you can select a different client here on the screen, and then it'll just show the permits that are associated with that one. So no more long scrolling on the permit selection page. It'll just show the ones that are applicable to you. And then also, again, there's that idea of being able to roll through all the mailer IDs that are assigned for that client or for yourself if you're using your mailer ID. If you do, for some reason, want to go through and only use a specific mailer ID for a job, you're really certain that you want to be using a specific mailer ID, then you can go into the advanced settings in the Intelligent Mail page and select a specific mailer ID to use for that job.
Bob, just to be clear, what happens if I break the uniqueness rule?
Well, the penalty at some point in time in the near future will be loss of the full service discount. So
that could add up dramatically.
It could over time, yes. And so
okay.
Yeah, it's something that everyone needs to be paying attention to.
Okay.
All right, and so here is the long-awaited grid. I apologize for all of the numbers here on this grid, but basically what I did, I installed this on an old machine that I had underneath my desk. I found it there, and so I installed Bulk Mailer Business, and I started running some comparisons. And I did this as clean as I could. I rebooted after each job to make sure that I wasn't tainting anything. I didn't have any other programs running, but so. With the 30,000 record list, the results are pretty similar. So Bulk Mailer Business is fairly, a little bit faster, but, you're really saving less than a minute by using Bulk Mailer Business. But things start to get a little bit more dramatic once you start getting into that 100,000 record range. And this is, again, a very basic list. This was just names and addresses, just running import, address correction, and sorting locally on the machine. So
sort took half the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, once you get into that 100,000 record range, you start seeing really some really quick processing speeds there with business, and it starts really identifying some efficiencies there, especially, again, if you're in that time crunch, you've got the job that needs to go out today and you need to get it through really fast. You start seeing those benefits even at 100,000 records. And then I took a bigger list. Now 750,000 records for professional is kind of stretching that product to its limit. And it definitely shows in the statistics that we see here. Address correction took almost 3.5 hours. I actually started the job off at about 3:30 here, and then I went home because I did other work before I went home, but I was 5 o'clock and the job was still processing.
Now, to tie back to something you said earlier, if you're doing this monster 750K job on Pro, your machine's locked up.
Yep.
You're in for the duration at that point. You
Yep.
can't start another session. Nobody else can log in and do it at that point. So
Yeah.
that's the only thing you're going to do for the next 3 hours.
Yeah. And, you're locked out. and basically all you're doing is processing that job. With bulk mailer business, you could be sitting there for that 3.5 hours processing your smaller jobs in the background. You could have someone else who's processing on their machine as well, and then also you're not actually waiting that 3.5 hours.
Less than a third the time for address correction.
Yeah. So there are some really quick efficiencies that just have to do with the database that we're reading and writing to. So, and again, all of these were local, and I rebooted after each job to make sure that we weren't skewing the numbers at all.
And 750K, that's a big mailing, but it's not unheard of by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, it's fairly common to have at least one of those jobs a year for a decent sized mail service provider. So,
and it's certainly something that's a problem you want.
I would hope so. Hope so. We want to make sure that our customers are growing, and that their customer base is growing, and that their capacity to process their jobs is increasing. So that's why I think bulk mailer business, for those customers that it makes sense, is a really easy decision for them.
Sounds like it.
Yeah. So the last question is how, right? How can you make that jump if you're a bulk mailer professional user and you've decided that this is really a decision that's right for your company? How would you do that transition between bulk mailer professional and bulk mailer business? So the first step is just installing the software. So you would install bulk mailer business. You would select where you want that SQL server to reside. You might want it on a server machine there on your network, or you may want it on a single person's machine. We're not too picky. You don't have to have a special machine dedicated only to bulk mailer business.
You can even put it on a machine underneath your desk.
Yes, you can, as evidenced. Yep. So the next step is converting your templates. So we don't want you to have to start over when you start using bulk mailer business. So we actually have a template converter. And what it'll do is it'll take all of your templates that you had in bulk mailer professional, and it'll move them into the format that's needed for bulk mailer business. And that's included in the product there. Then the next thing is if you are a mail service provider, you'll want to configure your clients. You'll want to configure your users, make sure that everything's set up there. The template converter tries to make an intelligent choice when it comes to creating the clients, but you always want to go in and check, right? You might want to cull things out at the time as well. And then you just start importing your lists and start using bulk mailer business as your primary mail software.
You make this sound very painless.
It actually really is.
And installing bulk mailer business is pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's very simple. It's just the way that you would normally install Pro. The only difference is you're going to be selecting where you want that server to reside.
Even Bob could do that.
Thanks.
Yeah, and we handle all the management of the installation of the database. It uses that SQL Server Express backend, and so we'll manage all of that for you. It's all included in that install package.
All right. So we got a few questions that are coming in here. And before we get started with the questions, I did want to throw out that Tracking Advantage, the Tracking Advantage webinar that's coming up next week. That's next Tuesday, so a week from today. It is yet another one in our Getting the Most Out of Bulk Mailer webinar series. And well, Bob and Kim, you guys are going to be here for that one, aren't you?
Right.
We're going to talk all about tracking. Bob, you're going to be remote.
I will be remote, yes.
From an undisclosed location. All right, so there's a question box on the right-hand side of the screen, and we've got questions coming in here. So let's go ahead and present these out to Bob and Kim. Also, there's some contact information on there. Again, if business sounds like something that you might want to talk about or see if it's right for you, feel free to call. We're not going to try to sell you something you don't need. It's just not the way we work here. So questions. How many users do you get with the entry-level bulk mailer business?
With the entry level, it is just a single user. Again, that single user can open multiple instances of bulk mailer and process it. Another thing is a single user is a single user that's actually logged in. So if you want to install it on multiple machines, but you would only have one person logged in at a certain time. So that would be that's the base package. And then if you would like additional users, then there's an add-on cost for that.
Can bulk mailer business verify the CRID against the USPS gateway?
If only. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of ways to actually get that verification without actually having your customers log into the gateway. So unfortunately, no, it does not verify that.
Tracking. Is that a business only thing, or is that something that I can do in Pro?
You can do tracking in Pro. We do have the 2 levels of tracking, so definitely come back next week. We're going to talk all about the different options when it comes to Easy Track. There's kind of a beginner package for Easy Track that allows you to kind of get some metadata about the tracking information for your mailing, and we have a complete package. So the difference between the professional version of Easy Track and the business version of Easy Track is that client interaction. So if you're going to be the only one who looks at that tracking information, then professional is going to be just fine for you. If you would like to offer that login information to your clients, that is only available with business.
That's kind of a cool thing to be offering them.
Well, and one of the things we've talked about on our postal affairs is over the last couple of months is we've seen the slowdown in mail delivery, and for mail owners that can be a very important thing, and they want to see where is my mail at, and so having that login for them to be able to go in and see their own mailing and where things are at is
and to know that it's not the mail services provider.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't the mail service provider that
and that's the important
dropped
part.
late.
Your
right?
customer comes in, stands at your front counter, and says, "Now you're where's my mail?" And the USPS has got a slowdown going on, like it does right now. We talked about first class mail sometimes taking 6 days now. You're stuck making excuses for the USPS at that point, and nobody wants to do that. But if you can point at it and go, "See, I mailed your mail. Now it's in the hands of the guys with the eagle."
Well, and then if it's important for that mail owner, if they see their mail stalling at a particular location, that gives them the ability to if they want to, pick up the phone and call there and say, "What's going on? I haven't seen my mail move in the last 2 days."
It's always Chicago, isn't it, Bob? It's always Chicago. So look and feel, Kim. I'm a Pro user, and now I'm going to make this jump into business because it's got cool features that I want and I need. And I'm going to grow my business. I'm growing anyway. The economy is heating up. Everything is fantastic. How scary is this?
It's only as scary as the screenshots that you've seen today. So basically what I did was I went through Bulk Mailer Business and highlighted the areas that are different. So it's the client management, it's the user text field interface, and the client or the login information, the user information. So from a actual mail flow standpoint, training is going to be almost a non-issue. The only thing is when you're on that day-to-day processing, it's going to be the selection of the client when you're creating that mailing. And other than that, the rest of the program flows almost exactly the same as Bulk Mailer Pro. So
I'm a Wizards guy. You can probably tell by my pointy hat that I've got on here. But what about the Wizards? Are they the same?
They are the same. Yeah. So the flow of the Wizards, the selections that you're going to have, the choices that you have are going to be very, very similar. You'll feel right at home with Bulk Mailer Business.
So now this is interesting. There's a question here about the add-ons, and the question is, does business have the same add-ons as Pro, like palletization, Easy Track, etc.? Now I was going to mention we do have a webinar coming up as part of this series about add-ons. We're going to be talking on Tuesday, July 14th. You can sign up for that. But Bob? Kim?
Yeah, so the same set of add-ons that you're familiar with Bulk Mailer Professional are available also with Bulk Mailer Business. So the idea behind Bulk Mailer Business is it's Pro Plus, right? So it's everything that you would have in Pro plus some additional functionality that's built into the system.
Is there anything I give up by going to business? What's the gotcha?
You don't get your JET database anymore.
Because I'm so attached to Access.
Some people really are, and they, if you're really working well inside of Pro, and any of the things that we've talked about today aren't really calling to you, they're not something that really seem like a good change for you, then business is not going to be a good fit. But there are some compelling reasons for those companies that are having those problems we've talked about.
And I'm going to go ahead and quote this question. You guys can jump in when appropriate. When I do an SCF or NDC analysis for drop shipping, is there a way to save the results as a file or to print them so that I can share the analysis with the account manager?
Unfortunately, no, but I will take that back to the development team.
So it's handy because we've got Kim Mock sitting here as the product owner of Bulk Mailer. That's the sort of feedback. It doesn't get any more direct than this. Straight to the development department.
Yep.
We can see that in the next build, right?
I'm not promising anything.
Okay, so maybe not that fast. Last chance for questions here. Is there, give me an example of a customer that you've talked to who made this jump from pro to business, and what was the reasoning behind it?
So I'll talk a little bit about a company that I visited just a couple months ago, and they haven't made the jump yet because it's financially it's not something that they're ready for. They have some restrictions into what time of year they can actually purchase software, and so but we talked a little bit about their processes and the amount of volume of jobs that they have, and one of the things that was really a big driver for them is they have to have everything be right, and it has to be right now. So I think everybody can kind of relate to that. Everything,
Doesn't seem unreasonable.
it has to be right and it has to be right now. And so they were using Bulk Mailer Professional, and so they were having to do a lot of calling over desks and saying, hey, this job's ready for variable data print. Hey, this is ready for pre-sorting, and there were a lot of manual handoffs, which would be fine, except they were actually rapidly expanding their business. And so they had a lot more clients that were coming in from different areas across the country. They had a lot of jobs that were taking up a lot of time, and they have the general fall mailing season rush every single year, and it was kind of one of those where it was a scramble to get through that, and then after the fall mailing season they were able to breathe and kind of
Sure.
actually go home and talk to their families. And so they were having a lot of problems with that. And for them, bulk mailer business is going to be a really great fit because they're going to be able to, first of all, be able to process across the company, kind of manage their usage and their flow in a much more streamlined way, and just be able to turn those jobs around faster. Their mailing software was really the bottleneck in their entire process, and with the bulk mailer business, it's gonna be able to alleviate that bottleneck, and then they can go on and find another efficiency in another area of their business. But it was a really good fit for them.
Software is supposed to make our lives easier.
Exactly.
We shouldn't sit around waiting on the software.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, Kim Mock, I want to thank you for coming in. There was a great presentation. I learned a lot about business here that I didn't know. I've been here a few years, and I didn't know that, in particular, the specifics on the database.
Yeah.
Fascinating stuff. And the multi-user stuff, that sounded like something I could put to work right away.
Great.
Bob, always a pleasure. Bob Shimmick, Senior Director of Postal Affairs. Always a pleasure. I guess I'll be seeing you for the Monday morning broadcast.
Yep, correct.
And we do want to thank everyone for joining us. Please take a survey that you will be presented at the end of this webinar. Those surveys are how we improve this broadcast. As I mentioned, this is part of an ongoing series, getting the most out of bulk mailers. So we would love to hear the sort of feedback that you've got, whether you found this to be helpful and what we can do to improve the future broadcasts. As I mentioned, this webinar will be available in its entirety on the SatoriSoftware.com website. In fact, as soon as we get out of here, I'm going to go start the process for posting that. For Satori Software, I'm Rob Perrin. I'm the Director of Multimedia Marketing. And once again, all of us here at Satori, would like to thank you for attending. On behalf of Satori, I would like to wish you smooth mailing ahead.